Chapter 20. Party in Berlin tonight. Even though the Stellaris was technically complete, it would be at least 3 months before she was accepted into the United Nations Navy. According to Admiral Siajotso, the starship would have to go through a series of space trials before she was deemed worthy of service. Fortunately, Inez would not have to go through her space trials alone. Ever since she arrived in Cape Canaveral, Central Officer Sepulveda was by her side. He completed his space training a long time ago, but he would drop in from day to day as Inez went through hers. David would help Inez get her sense of direction back after a session of zero-gravity training, and he would give her a very helpful list of foods to avoid in space. Even when you're in artificial gravity, some food just won't sit right, he said. Plus, most human warships below frigate size don't have artificial gravity anyway, so you should not get used to it. On top of that, David taught Inez about space combat and the kind of doctrine the UN Navy preferred to use. Fact of the matter is, the galaxy outnumbers us 1,000 to 1, David said, so we adjust our strategies accordingly should we ever get into a fight. Nearly all human warships will have either a cloaking device or a hologram emitter to increase survivability. Why is that? Inez had asked. The strategy is based on the one used by the Soviet Union during their war against Japan almost a century ago, David explained. Their surface navy didn't stand a chance, so the Soviets would use submarines almost exclusively. The idea is to sneak up on your enemy, either invisible or disguised, hit them hard, and then run away while they're still seeing stars. So whenever she wasn't spending time with Cassandra, Inez was spending time in military simulators. Inside the Space Training Center, Inez and her future crewmates were placed in replicas of various components of the Stellaris and worked their way through dozens of drills and scenarios. Some exercises were easy, like navigating an asteroid storm while trying to repair damaged thrusters. Others were more troublesome, like a scenario in which she needed to quickly identify an unknown starship without the aid of a computer. Sometimes, Scarlett would come to watch her daughter train, and Inez was determined to make sure her mother's trust was not misplaced. June 5th. 2086. Inez stepped into the simulator. Today, it was a perfect recreation of the Stellaris' bridge. Inez rolled her eyes. She had been put through hundreds of bridge simulations, designed to test her ability to command. She felt like she was finally starting to get the knack for this sort of thing. As Inez stepped onto the mock bridge, 4 people followed her. These individuals were active members of her command staff. They would help Inez run the ship. Off-duty, Inez also made an effort to befriend them as well. First up was Commodore Lorenzo Vargas. He was the only person here who outranked Inez. A skinny twig of a man, Vargas was the strike group commander. The Stellaris and her sister ships would fly together as a fleet, and Vargas had supreme command over the group. The Stellaris would be his personal flagship. Inez spent quite a lot of time trying to befriend Lorenzo, knowing that she could use her position in the ISO to exploit him should the need ever arise. Next was Central Officer Yaroslav Datsenko. While Inez commanded the Stellaris, Datsenko was her number 2. Ethnically, Yaroslav Datsenko was Ukrainian, but his UN Navy uniform bore the patches of several European countries: Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. Datsenko was a bald man, and his little eyes were narrowed as though he was eternally preparing for a fistfight. Inez loved his intense energy, and after a couple of dates, she found him to be almost overwhelming when they were alone together. After that came Chief Petty Officer Akbar Saraki. He was a Nigerian man with a big toothy smile that always made Inez drop her guard. There was just something about this guy she liked. As chief of the watch, Saraki ensured Inez's orders would be obeyed. Originally, Akbar was Inez's first choice for a new intimate partner. She had long since given up on hoping for another shot with Lawrence Ridge. Inez tried to make an advance on him, but Akbar was playing hard to get, and Inez had a difficult time getting the man to hold still for a conventional date, much less any other type of romantic activity, meaning Datsenko received Inez's attention instead. The final member of Inez's team was not a member of the UN Navy, but of XCOM. Zhen Li was a stern-looking Chinese woman. If Saraki was the person who always smiled, then Li was the one who never did. Zhen Li was the commander of a UN Space Ranger detachment, assigned to the ship to provide security. Li's troops were a mixed force of XCOM and UN Army soldiers. Once her team was in the simulator, other members of the bridge crew filtered in and took their stations. The local staff who worked for Cape Canaveral gave Inez the thumbs up, then closed the door while yelling to their superiors, "All right, folks, put him in space!" The UN starship Stellaris was on a routine patrol in the Alpha Centauri star system, not too far from the interstellar border between the United Nations of Earth and the Higaran Empire. On the bridge, Inez looked up from her sensor screen as the comms officer said, "Commander, we've picked up a distress signal from a civilian ship." "Let me hear it," Inez replied. The comms officer obliged, piping the message through the intercom speakers. "This is the Japanese flag merchant vessel Kiryu Kai out of Altair 4. We have struck a mine and are losing power. Our hull is penetrated and we've taken casualties." Central Officer Datsenko attempted to reply. "Attention Kiryu Kai. This is the starship Stellaris. Give us your location relative to the nearest star." "Stellaris, we are in a highly elliptical orbit around Gamma Hydra," replied the Kiryu Kai. "That's on the Higaran side of the border," said Chief Saraki. Inez touched the touchscreen on one of the computers and called up information about the stricken vessel. It was a Kobayashi Maru class starliner, crew of 81, 300 passengers. "The Higarans will not tolerate an illegal crossing of the border," Commodore Vargas commented. "This is Program 47, said Zhen Li. "I'm sure of it." She and her comrades all gave one another knowing smiles. They had done this simulation before. They knew what was going to happen. "In that case, we'll do this quickly," Inez replied. "Helm, set an intercept course for the Kiryu Kai, maximum speed. Chief of the Watch, raise the cloaking sail." "Aye aye," replied Chief Saraki. He pushed an intercom button and issued an order to the cloaking sail crew. "Rig the ship to run dark and silent." Fully cloaked, the Stellaris crossed the Higaran border. For about 3 minutes, all was smooth and quiet. The Stellaris opened up her hangar bay and was preparing to dispatch rescue craft to the stricken vessel when a very loud noise echoed through the bridge, causing everyone to cry out and cover their ears. "What was that?" Inez yelled. "Higaran proximity sensor," Datsenko called out. "The jig is up!" "Shut down the cloak! Polarize armor!" Inez ordered, her heart racing. But it was too late. Looming out of the darkness like a monolith, a Higaran battlecruiser descended onto the Stellaris. 2 bright beams of light pierced the blackness of space, and in one fell swoop, the Stellaris was cut clean in half by twin ion beams. The lights came on as the simulation ended. All of the trainees grumbled and groaned in frustration. Inez slumped down in one of the chairs at the back of the bridge, shaking her head in a mix of humiliation and anger. Finally, the voice of the simulator's operator spoke over the intercom. "So, Commander Espinosa, What happened? We got cocky, Inez replied. We're dead. Reset the sim, boss. We're going again. After a long day of training, Inez just wanted to go to her new living space in the Divine Altier, eat some food, and finish seducing Central Officer Datsenko. But she had one more stop to make before calling it a night. Waving goodbye to her future shipmates, Inez got into the driver's seat of her new car and traveled the short distance between the Apollo facility and the adjacent Kennedy Space Center. This part of Inez's daily routine went like clockwork. Every day, without fail, she would drive over to the former vehicle assembly building at exactly 7 p.m. and check on Cassandra, whose long days usually ended around the same time. Inez was seeing a lot of Cassandra these days, and the little girl would look forward to her visits. Cassandra would often say that visiting with Inez was her favorite thing to do, and she would spend most of the next day thinking up new word games to play with her. The Prometheus staff had even grown to trust Inez so much that she was allowed to take Cassandra's pill bottle to the gene therapy clinic for refills. However, nobody was telling Inez exactly what the pills were for. By now, everyone on the Cape knew that Subject 2 was basically under Inez's care, even though the little girl continued to live in the same prison block as the other Prometheus test subjects. Today, however, things went a little off the rails. As she turned off the Kennedy Parkway and onto the Saturn Causeway, Inez had to jam on her brakes as she found her path blocked by a convoy of military vehicles. Inez swore. She knew that if she was even a minute late for her visit, Cassandra would be upset. Of course, like most normal humans, Inez hated the thought that she might upset a child, but then there were the unique consequences that came with Cassandra losing her cool. Inez brought her car to a full and complete stop, then rolled down her window to yell at the military drivers. She regretted that move instantly. A pungent, repulsive stench wafted its way into the car, causing Inez to gag and choke. What the hell? She cried out. Sorry about that, called a soldier from one of the trucks. We normally do this at night, but our schedules got kind of turned around today. We'll be out of your way in a few minutes. I don't have a few minutes, Inez snapped. I need to be at the VIB right now. Lady, I can't help you there, said the driver. Just wait your turn. Inez felt tense. She really did not want to be the scientist assigned to Cassandra this evening, as this delay was sure to cause a tantrum at minimum and something catastrophic in a worst-case scenario. She leaned forward in the driver's seat, trying to see what was so important that these soldiers had to block the street with a long line of trucks. Again, Inez regretted her actions. A sickening display could be seen in the open-top beds of each military truck. Dead bodies were piled high on top of one another. As far as Inez could tell, each truck was carrying the corpses of some 50 to 100 alien children. Crumpled Vanians were almost unrecognizable without their feathers. Levakian cubs and neonate vipers were crushed beneath the motionless form of an immature muton. With a jolt of the stomach, Inez spotted the colorful Cybon fledgling that had once rode on Cassandra's shoulders a few months ago. The dead avian was wedged in the arms of a Partogan boy, no older than Cassandra. Inez felt like she was going to be sick. This was the second time she'd seen a convoy transporting Xenos to the burial pit outside of the facility, but she'd never been this close before. Not close enough to see faces, or to recognize the aliens she met earlier. Inez gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. She knew alien children were being murdered at Cape Canaveral. it was because they were unsatisfactory subjects for the Prometheus project. Inez also knew that because she was a member of the ISO and a supporter of the project in general, that she was complicit in these horrible crimes. Inez was equally guilty as the actual killers. But this was the only way she knew to keep Cassandra safe. Inez was terrified that if she did something wrong, Cassandra might end up lifeless on one of those trucks. Unfortunately, Inez could not do the right thing. She just did not know what it could be. And every day this went on, the horror would continue. Inez had no choice but to just let it happen. That makes me such a horrible person, Inez told herself. I'm a monster. Inez sighed, watching as the last of the trucks pulled onto the Kennedy Parkway and started to drive off. But in the moment before she put her foot on the gas pedal, Inez heard an unbidden voice in the back of her mind. I'm a monster. Inez looked around her, checking to see if somebody was speaking to her. No, she was alone in the car and the windows were up. Frowning, Inez started driving towards the VAB. But something strange was going on now. She could feel it. Inez's vision seemed to be flickering, and a headache was building up with each passing second. Realizing that something was wrong, Inez pulled over onto the side of the road and parked her car. She gripped her head just as a wave of dizzying nausea overtook her. Inez blinked, and then, quite suddenly, she was not in the car anymore. Inez found herself standing in a corner of the VAB lobby, and two nurses were trying to hold her by the shoulders. Inez cried out in a voice that was not her own. "Leave me alone!" Inez wailed. "Everyone hates me anyway, so now I hate everyone." The adults in the lobby begged her to calm down, and said that Inez was probably just running late. She would be here any moment. "No, she's not," Cassandra wailed. "She's just sitting in her car, thinking about how I'm a monster." Confused emotions swam in the gulf between Cassandra and Inez, their consciousnesses linked yet separate. For Inez, there was a sense of immense familiarity. She knew she'd been in this situation at least once before. Then Inez gasped, and she was suddenly back in her car. It all added up. This had happened before, in the Anward family home, only an hour before Cassandra actually turned up on their doorstep. This must be how my sensitivity works, Inez told herself. I can sense whenever Cassandra gets worked up, and she starts venting psionic energy. Inez finally realized she was seeing the world through Cassandra's eyes, and the little girl seemed to be fully aware of the fact that Inez was reading her thoughts. Inez caught her breath and tried to focus. Now that she knew what was going on, she could try to make better sense out of it. Putting her car in park so it didn't roll away, Inez closed her eyes and tried to reopen the mental link to Cassandra. All at once, Inez was swept away by a tide of irrational anger and frustration. Cassandra was throwing a tantrum. She did not want to go anywhere or do anything. She pulled, pushed, and fought against any of the adults who tried to lead her out of the lobby. Cassandra screamed and cried and wailed against the people around her. She felt abandoned and unloved. And above all else, Cassandra was angry at herself, angry at what she was and the life she had to live because of it. Inez knew what was about to happen a moment before it did. A series of lights flashed on and off within Cassandra's body, so brightly that her skeleton could be seen like some sick Halloween display. Smoke curled up from Cassandra's body as the fringes of her prison jumpsuit started to burn and smolder. With a great effort, Inez pulled her focus away from Cassandra. She was back to herself, back in her car on the Saturn Causeway. Inez scrambled out of her car and started running the 200 yards between herself and the VAB. There was no time to wait for traffic. Alarmed workers and soldiers asked if something was wrong. "Get an ambulance and firefighters to the VAB!" Inez screamed. Men and women looked at the structure, confused. Before they could point out that nothing appeared to be wrong, a small explosion shattered the evening calm. A flash of green light and a concussive blast blew out several doors and windows on the ground floor of the VAB. Inez cried out in dismay and quickened her pace, reaching the VAB just as acrid black smoke started to billow out of the lobby entrance. "Cassandra!" Inez crawled out. 2 scientists and a soldier ran out of the smoke to safety. Small green flames clung onto their clothes as they ran. Inez looked into the lobby and saw a flickering green light inside of the building. The Emerald Avatar was on a rampage, using the power of its mind to smash walls and furniture without so much as lifting a hand. A group of XCOM soldiers, armed with arc throwers and laser rifles, came up behind Inez, raising their weapons as they arrived. Inez waved at the troopers and told them to wait. "Put those away," she snapped, pointing at the weapons. "That's not what she needs." At that moment, the Emerald Avatar stepped out of the burning lobby, emerging from the smoke in a terrifying kind of silence. Its body was flickering like a damaged light bulb as the creature blinked into and out of perceptible reality at high speed. The Emerald Avatar turned its head to gaze at the soldiers, who took a frightened step back. Inez felt a charge run through the air around her and somehow knew that a soulfire attack was imminent. She stepped between the Emerald Avatar and the soldiers, keeping her arms held wide as she stared defiantly into the blinking eyes above her. "Cassandra, wait, it's me!" Inez shouted. The Emerald Avatar hesitated before shifting its gaze. Instantly, the northern wall of the neighboring building erupted into an inferno of green soulfire and collapsed. Inez flinched as she felt the ends of her hair getting singed. The Emerald Avatar did not speak, yet somehow, perhaps through her new ability to sense psionic energy, Inez could understand exactly what this psionic creature was trying to say. "You're not a monster, Cassandra!" Inez spoke clearly, trying to keep any hesitation at bay. "I know you think you are." But Inez did not get to finish. With a blasting noise like a cannon, a psionic pulse hit Inez and knocked her off her feet. Gripping her head in pain, Inez sat up and slowly started to process the sound of laser rifles and arc throwers being fired. A moment later, she heard screams of agony as the Emerald Avatar started to attack the group of soldiers. Somehow, despite being racked from head to foot in pain, Inez found the willpower to stand upright. She saw the Emerald Avatar marching forward in pursuit of the fleeing soldiers, one of whom was throwing away his body armor as it was consumed by green fire. For just a fleeting moment, Inez seriously considered allowing the Emerald Avatar to continue its destructive rampage, and then use the chaos to stage some kind of escape for herself and Cassandra. But nagging fears and worries about Cassandra's well-being forced Inez to shelf the plan. Her father specifically asked Inez to protect Cassandra, not exploit her powers. The ISO was already working on the latter part anyway. Inez ran after the Emerald Avatar. She had no plan at all. She did not know how to reverse the transformation, but Inez knew she had to do something. Inez screamed at the top of her lungs to get the Emerald Avatar's attention. This time, it did not hesitate. A telekinetic pulse hit Inez like a speeding car and sent her tumbling to the ground again. It felt like Inez had just broken 2 of her ribs, but there was no time to think about that. The only thing on her mind was, get to Cassandra. Inez stood up again, only to be blown over once more. The Emerald Avatar now refocused entirely on Inez and her show of defiance. When she stood up a 3rd time, Inez was nearly blinded as green soulfire erupted all around her. The Emerald Avatar had just attempted to kill Inez by burning her with soulfire. But something strange was happening. Inez could feel the green flames licking her body. The pain that came with it was sharp and intense, as though she was being branded with hot metal. Yet, she was not being overwhelmed. Inez could still stand and focus her eyes on the Emerald Avatar. One more psionic pulse hit Inez. The invisible force collided with such intensity that most of the soulfire was extinguished, revealing most of Inez's clothes were charred and blackened, while large patches of her skin were also burned. Pushing her way through pain and agony that would have incapacitated most others, Inez started walking towards the Emerald Avatar, which attempted a reluctant retreat, taking a half-hearted step backwards. "I'm right here, Cassandra," Inez said. "I'm here for you, okay? I won't leave you." A deep groaning sounded from somewhere inside of the Emerald Avatar. And then, a moment later, the transformation started to undo itself. The green woman shrank back down into a child, while her body became opaque once more. Restored to her normal self, Cassandra wavered on her feet for a moment, before she slumped forward and collapsed. Inez also lost the ability to stand. She crumpled to the ground and crawled on her hands and knees towards Cassandra. As XCOM soldiers called out for rescue, Inez reached Cassandra and sat up, cradling the young girl in her arms. "You're okay now," Inez said, soothing both herself and Cassandra. "It's okay. I've got you. You'll be safe with me." June 6th, 2086. Berlin, Germany. Marcus Robinson was trying to be patient. He and his niece were inside the headquarters of the Internal Security Office, the main spy agency of the UN. They were sent here on a simple errand, but now Marcus and Sophie were stuck in an office with no choice but to wait for Director Freeman to finish gushing to them about her daughter. "So you see," Scarlett was saying, "Nezzy might have saved hundreds of lives in the facility, all by sheer determination and a bit of dumb luck." Marcus shook his head. "With all due respect, ma'am, I would never allow my family members to help test experimental psionic weapons," he said. "It just sounds too risky." For security reasons, Director Freeman refused to tell the truth about what happened at Cape Canaveral. The official story was this: Inez was testing a psionic weapon platform. It malfunctioned, and she was injured, along with 3 other people. Scarlett could not contain her excitement. She continued talking while she put on her hat and coat. "Did you ever read those books by Dr. Tigan?" she said. "He said that when he studied Jericho and the other gifted soldiers of XCOM, he found out a person's ability to resist psionic attack is tied to their own mental willpower. So an ordinary person could shrug off a telepathic assault. Or maybe even break out of mind control, if they put their mind to it. Don't you see what that means? It means we're going to be late for the Security Council, Sophie interrupted. Are we going or not? Because Etienne is waiting for Uncle Marcus to come back. Even though she was Varian Robinson's half-sister, Sophie still had the vaguely mixed-race appearance borne by most descendants of Blake Robinson and Chihiro Tachibana. Tonight, she was dressed in nearly the same outfit as her uncle, an oversized white t-shirt with an image of Secretary General Etienne on it, captioned with the words, 5 more years. Sophie checked her watch. We've got 20 minutes, Director. Let's go. Surrounded by an entourage of bodyguards, Scarlett Freeman and the 2 Robinsons left the ISO headquarters and started the short walk to the Reichstag. The 2 buildings were on opposite sides of the new Brandenburg Gate, a facsimile of a historical structure that was once very important to German culture. The Reichstag itself was the capital of the United Nations of Earth, and the primary meeting place of both the UN General Assembly and the Security Council. Tonight, there was going to be a very important vote, and appropriately, there was a huge crowd of people assembling in the Tiergarten. Men and women from all over the Earth were gathered to show support for the countries currently in the election for the UN Security Council. National flags waved and anthems were sung. Sophie cheered at a group of Belarusians who were wearing Pascal Etienne shirts just like her own. Sol Invictus! Sophie cried out. 5 more years for Etienne! The Belarusians waved their flags and returned Sophie's words with enthusiasm. The UN Security Council was the most powerful body in the human government. Consisting of representatives from 15 nations, this group was responsible for creating new missions and objectives for the UN military, and electing the Secretary General, among other things. And every 2 years, 5 out of 15 seats would be up for election. This year, the Security Council election would be more important than ever, because just 6 months from now, the Security Council would hold an election to choose the next UN Secretary General. 5 more years! Chanted a group of Russians. Support Pascal Etienne! Scarlett, Marcus, and Sophie all waved at the group as they passed by. But the trio was alarmed to see that an even larger group of people took this moment to shout at the Etienne supporters. Nearly 7,000 people had shown up to support Blake Robinson, or rather, support countries that planned on voting for him in the December election. At the quickest of glances, Scarlett, Sophie, and Marcus could see the Robinson supporters outnumbered the Etienne supporters almost 2-1. The Tiergarten was divided between the 2 camps, with Robinson supporters taking up so much of the park that they were only a few feet away from the front steps of the Reichstag, and were being held back by a mixed force of UN soldiers, local Polizei, and ISO agents. Inside the Reichstag, the UN General Assembly was gathering in the meeting place of the old German Bundestag on the ground floor. A grand total of 185 nations were represented here, but there were also a few empty spaces around the room, representing nations that were completely destroyed during the 2015 invasion and subsequent Second Hyperspace War. A simple national flag over these empty spaces denoted which country had assumed responsibility for the territory and obligations of the destroyed state. The President of the General Assembly, an elderly diplomat from Vietnam, gavelled the meeting into session. Then he announced the arrival of the Secretary General. As usual, someone was leading Pascal Etienne by the hand as he entered the General Assembly. However, he was clearly familiar with the old Bundestag chambers. He moved around with an air of familiarity. After just a minute, Secretary General Etienne found his seat next to Scarlett Freeman and the 2 Robinsons. While the General Assembly President got the formalities out of the way, Marcus and Sophie brought the Secretary General up to date on his re-election campaign. "We are confident, sir," Marcus said. "Tonight, your majority on the Security Council will be secured. After that, it's smooth sailing until the December election." The President called for silence. It was time to vote. "Here we go," Secretary General Etienne muttered. "Time to see if all of our networking and schmoozing is paid off." "There are 5 Security Council seats up for election today," the President said. "Up first are 2 seats from the African group. We thank the Gambia and Zimbabwe for their service over the past 2 years. Now, there are 4 countries running for the open African group seats: Comoros, Libya, Mauritius, and Angola. The 2 countries that receive the most votes will be elected to the Security Council. Delegates, please vote now using the buttons in front of you." While the voting began, Scarlett whispered into Etienne's ear, "Sir, you should know. Several of the countries running for Security Council seats have pledged to vote for you in December if they are elected today." "Which ones?" Etienne asked. "Libya, Angola, Iran, Belarus, and Cuba," Scarlett answered. At that moment, the voting in the African group concluded. The President called for quiet and announced the result. "Warmest congratulations to the honorable delegations from Comoros and Mauritius. You have been elected to the Security Council." Scarlett, Pascal, Sophie, and Marcus all dropped their jaws. They were stunned into complete silence. Not only had the country they supported lost, yet another supporter of the opposition was now on the Security Council. This was bad. Marcus stammered. He tried to talk about how to adapt Etienne's political strategy and survive this blow, but there were more blows to come. In rapid fashion, what started as Etienne's political defeat quickly turned into a rout. After Africa, each of the remaining nation groups saw a country that supported the Secretary General replaced with one that did not. Japan defeated Iran for the Asia-Pacific seat with almost 90% of the vote. In the vote for the Latin American seat, Barbados received 100% of the vote, beating Cuba. And then the hammer blow came down in the vote for the Eastern European seat, where, in an upset nobody saw coming, Ukraine defeated Belarus. As the final result was read aloud, an eruption of noise sounded from outside. In the Tiergarten and the surrounding streets of Berlin, supporters of Blake Robinson broke out in spontaneous celebration. All across the park, people started cheering with glee and waving the flags of the 5 new Security Council members. Someone in Pankow was shooting fireworks into the sky. In their seats, Secretary General Etienne was having a rapid conversation with Marcus and Sophie, trying to figure out how the re-election campaign would recover from this defeat. "We have miscalculated," Etienne said. "Director Freeman, we need..." "No." Scarlett's voice was icy. She seemed to be looking beyond the General Assembly, comprehending and understanding something the Secretary General did not. "Director Freeman!" Etienne tried to get her attention. "We must plan our next move." Scarlett stood up. She ignored the Secretary General and his election workers. She looked around at the General Assembly. Hundreds of diplomats were standing up to applaud the results and congratulate the 5 winners of the election. "This is it," Scarlett mumbled. "It's the end." She turned to look at the Secretary General. On many occasions, Scarlett had watched someone die. She had even been the cause of many deaths in her own time. But now, looking at Pascal, she got a reminder of where the phrase "dead man walking" came from. Pascal Etienne was on borrowed time. There was no longer a guarantee of his re-election. Now, Scarlett needed to prepare for the very real possibility that just 6 months from now, the Stormbreaker Blake Robinson might soon be her boss. "Make your plans," Scarlett said. "I have to make my own." And without another word, the spymaster left the room and quickly departed the Reichstag. Outside, a street party of unparalleled scale was unfolding on the streets of Berlin. Scarlett found that traveling just a couple hundred yards to ISO headquarters was now a real challenge. Drunk men danced on the road, singing space shanties. Veterans of the Second Hyperspace War gathered around memorials for group photos. And children ran all over the place with streamers and little flags in their hands. Scarlett tried to cross through the Brandenburg Gate and was accosted by a group of young women who tried to get her to drink a beer with them. Pushing the large stein away, Scarlett extricated herself from the group and cut across the front lawn of the Russian embassy, where some prankster was projecting a holographic image onto the building. Scarlett looked up and saw an image of Blake Robinson, wearing his old XCOM uniform and carrying a Hawaiian flag on a long pole. Scarlett swore. This was far more than just a shift in political culture. She could see the signs. If this was allowed to continue, to spiral out of control, the movement that started here in Berlin could turn into a revolution. Scarlett could not allow this to happen. She broke into a jog, heading towards the ISO building. When she was about 50 yards away, Scarlett noticed that none of the guards around the spy agency HQ seemed to be doing their jobs. Just like the thousands of civilians around them, the ISO guards were looking up into the sky, slack-jawed. "What is that?" a soldier cried out. Scarlett skidded to a stop and looked around. Then she saw what everyone else was looking at. "Look up!" a man cried out. "One of our ships is up there!" "It looks like it's on fire!" a woman screamed. Then Scarlett saw it. A UN starship was entering Earth's atmosphere. The vessel was so large that even from ground level, she could make out its general shape and size. It was, without question, a Scharnhorst-class battlecruiser. "Holy Jericho!" cried a war veteran. "That's our flagship! It's crashing!" The UNS Kurt Waldheim screamed through the dark skies, illuminated by the moonlight and stars above. 2 more starships rose to meet her from the ground, but the battlecruiser was out of control. Brilliant red and orange flames enveloped the mighty vessel as fragments of the hull broke free and flew away. Then, with 2 supersonic cracks, the Kurt Waldheim broke into pieces. Fiery debris began to rain down on Central Europe. The core section of the battlecruiser thundered to the ground like a meteor and slammed into the earth about 50 miles outside of Berlin. For just one moment, Scarlett was no different than the people of Berlin. All she could do was watch in horror. When the sun rose tomorrow morning, everything would be different.